Welcome to The Volley, a podcast by Tennis Majors, bringing you in-depth insights into tennis's latest hot topics from the Tennis Majors team.
Hello and welcome to The Volley, a podcast by Tennis Majors. I'm your host, Max Whittle, and though I know little about animals, goats are on the agenda today. That's right, the greatest of all time debate is a universal and incredibly popular one in today's sporting landscape. And while you may be in the camp of simply wanting to applaud the best to ever play the game in equal measure, we cannot ignore the fact that after Novak Djokovic's latest success at Wimbledon, three of the greatest tennis players of all time are each the owner of 20 Grand Slam victories. They are in a deadlock, but can and should their greatness be separated? Here at Tennis Majors, we are dedicated to discussing the latest tennis news via digital media, bringing you, the tennis fan, video, debate, and news from the tennis world. So the year is 2021, but the numbers on tennis fans' lips right now, 20 slams for Federer, 20 for Nadal, and now 20 for Djokovic. Why is the GOAT discussion so important today, and can we possibly differentiate three absolute icons of tennis? We will find out on today's show. Joining me on this edition of The Volley, it's Tennis Majors Director and Editor-in-Chief, Cedric Rouquet. Cedric, thank you for joining us on The Volley podcast. How are you doing, my friend?
My pleasure. I'm good. I'm tired, just like after Grand Slam for any journalist working in tennis. But I'm good. It's good to have slams. And how are you?
I'm very well. I'm tired, but for different reasons. We shall not speak about the Euros final. Let's just move straight on with the tennis. However we're doing, it likely never matches the success of Roger Federer, Rafa Nadal and Novak Djokovic, who I'm sure is tired after his Wimbledon victory recently. All playing in the same era, Cedric. 60 Grand Slams between them. How fortunate, first of all, are we to be witnessing all of this?
We are fortunate, I guess. As far as I can see, everyone is very conscious to be privileged to witness this level of tennis and this modern era, which is not without asking questions for the future, by the way, but it's another topic. We are very lucky to witness this kind of tennis, this kind of level. It was not really the case for yesterday's final, to be honest, but it's not by fortune if Djokovic wins 20 slam. He does that because two men, Federer and Nadal, inspired him in being so good, in having so great objectives and goals in life. And so, of course, we are very fortunate, even if I think that the big three era is more or less behind us. We just witnessed 8 years of an incredible part of tennis tennis history. Yeah.
Well, we will talk about what you think the definition of the big three is currently later in the episode. But I wanted to ask you first. I know you live a tennis life, Cedric. When did the GOAT debate, which can I point out is never ending and highly subjective, but when did the GOAT debate begin in tennis, do you think?
It's a very good question from you, Max, because greatest tennis player of all time, and I can't remember that this question created a lot of debate before the moment where we felt that Nadal or Djokovic, or both of them, could win the same number of slams as Federer. Before the moment where Federer won his 15th Grand Slam, Pete Sampras had the record. It was 14 Grand Slams. I can't remember people claiming he was the greatest of all time because he had won 14 slams. I mean, the tone of the discussions were more or less, yes, Sampras made it, but Rod Laver made two calendar slams, and Björn Borg had a tremendous impact on his era, and McEnroe was magical, and you shouldn't forget Roy Emerson. Roy Emerson was the record holder before Sampras. I can't remember any person saying that Emerson was the greatest player of all time at any moment before that. So the GOAT debate is very modern. I think it's a lot related to social network and the volume of conversation we have and of passionate conversation we can have there. And it's a pretty recent question, and I think there's something incredible in noticing that this debate is it's very loud at a moment where it's very difficult to answer that, because we have three monsters able to win 20 slams in career.
Well, we're fortunate, aren't we, with tennis and football, because we have current GOAT debates: Federer, Djokovic, Nadal in tennis, Messi, Ronaldo in football, whereas before we've always looked at, for example, in basketball, LeBron James and Michael Jordan, one is retired and one is currently playing. And I think you're right. Social media has such an important role to play, because after every single event these days in sport, it seems like we generate a new list. We want to contextualize every single success that a player or a team has. Thinking back to all the conversations that you've had with journalists, players, friends, how is the greatest of all time debate viewed within tennis circles? Is it positive or is it negative?
I think it's pretty clear that the GOAT debate is very important for the fans of the three players. It used to be very important for Federer's fans, because Federer was the first to win 14, then to win 15, then to win 18 and 20. He had this kind of statue of the greatest of all time. Then it was very important for Nadal fans, who said, okay, but probably Rafa is able to win 20 Slam as well, and it's the case since Roland Garros last year. And now we can feel it's very important for Djokovic's fan, because Djokovic has 20 and has other stats for him. Maybe we'll talk about that later. And he seems to be the one between the three able to continue the series. So I think this debate is very important for them. If you are not that connected to, if you don't have what we could love for one of these three players, it's not that important. This title doesn't exist. It only exists in the mind and in the heart of people thinking it's very important. Probably those three players will have someday awards in the Hall of Fame in Newport, when the last grass tournament of the season is played right now. But, well, it's very important in a way, because it's why we love sports. It's all the narratives around the results, all the narratives around the matches, all the narratives about the players' public image. So that's very important. That's why we love sport. That's why we spend hours talking about that and writing stories and watching matches.
It's very different, though, between discussing your favorite player and the greatest player. And the reason I asked you that question was because the problem is, by having this discussion, you start criticizing some of the greatest players ever, right? I mean, you already referenced Pete Sampras. 14 doesn't sound like a lot anymore, but it's still incredible. But we do start to criticize.
I don't know if we start to criticize, but for the very passionate people involved in this GOAT debate, yeah, of course. If you want to say that, I don't know, Federer is the greatest, you have to find problems in the track records of Nadal and Djokovic, which is complicated, and it's the same for Nadal and Djokovic. But yes, those three guys are pushing the limits. What we could were the limits in tennis achievement. One thing to note is that it's not over, because Novak Djokovic, notably from the three, looks like he's very able to win more than 20 slams. And you can also note one thing: we as a journalist and passionate about tennis, we pretend that it's an incredible era, and 20, it will never be done. Sampras today in the New York Times said that when he achieved his 14th slam, if anyone who would have told him, guy, in 15 or 20 years, 3 men will have won 20, he wouldn't have believed it, and I think nobody would have believed it. And the 3 of them, Nadal, Djokovic, and Federer, if you read carefully to what they say, they often say, well, those records are huge, but they are made to be beaten, and someday anyone will beat me. Even Nadal says that about his 13 Roland Garros, which is beyond belief. But I think you have to listen to those 3 guys because what they mean to be, I think, is okay. The one part of this kind of a statement is to pull out the pressure and to look like a nice guy who respect the opponents, etc., etc. But another part of these statements, I think, say that themselves as tennis players, they deeply felt how strong it was for them to run for those records, how important it was for them at some point to become best players and to always look at the details that could lead them to be even better. That's exactly what said Djokovic yesterday on the field when he received the trophy. He said, "I'm there because of Federer and Nadal, who were his opponents." But what he meant, of course, is that they inspired him, and what they mean is that those records are already probably inspiring young players, and at some point those very powerful goals in tennis that they had themselves, they can become goals of any players in the future. A player that will have a best insight than ever in physical preparation, in mental preparation, best equipment ever, and who knows, that would be able to go even further. I'm talking to you from the Mouratoglou Tennis Academy, where Tennis Majors has his offices, and we see there players of every age coming to become champion. And recently, one of them, aged 9, said very seriously to Patrick that his goal in life was to win more slams than Rafa. and I know if this guy has Federer's talents and he's a great worker and have luck in life, who knows, maybe he will do it.
Well, I'd like to wish the player that wants to go after Nadal's 13 titles at Roland Garros and counting the best of luck. Maybe they will come out of the Mouratoglou Academy. I'm sure that's the case, Cedric. A lot of the time, though, a tennis fan's favourite player, it often comes down to taste and preference. It's who they like watching, what that player stands for off the court. Perhaps it's a personal moment that they've had with that player. They've met them before. They have a picture with them. Hence why the GOAT debate is so subjective. It's so biased. Comparing eras is also incredibly difficult, and you've mentioned that too. But I guess my next question is based a lot really on Novak Djokovic winning his 20th at Wimbledon. John McEnroe saying right after that he'd be surprised if Novak didn't win 25 slams. Do we get to a point where total Grand Slam victories, pure statistics, outweigh all other arguments?
Well, once again, it depends on who you are talking to. I think that for any Federer fan, even if Djokovic win 25 slams, a part of their brain will tell that Federer was the first, that he reached those limits first with a more classy game, etc., etc. So I don't think that for fans, the number of slams will have a decisive impact, and it's not a problem.
What about if tennis has the conversation?
Yeah, as a journalist and as a so-called pundit in tennis, you must recognize that, winning 25 or 22 slams is not exactly the same thing as winning 20 if your rivals won 20. Recently, Patrick Mouratoglou stated that the greatest of all time would be the guy with the most slams, which means that today the GOAT doesn't exist. I think it's a point of view you can respect, but I think it's not that simple because from just an observer point of view, you could consider that Djokovic is already the GOAT if you focus on everything on the narrative, because he has 20 just like Federer and Nadal, but he has two things Federer and Nadal don't have. Yes, you have the number of weeks at number one. It's not a massive insight for me. Of course, if he spends 100 weeks or 150 weeks, it will become a criteria, of course. But for the moment, it's not that important. What two things are important from my point of view is that in this three-pole rivalry, Djokovic won on his opponent's field. A little like Italy yesterday at Wembley. I'm sorry, Max. What I mean is that Djokovic won Roland Garros beating Nadal at his peak, or presumably at this peak this year, which is an incredible achievement. And he happened to win, if I remember well, 3 finals in Wimbledon against Federer. And you know that Federer is the record holder. He played 12 finals in Wimbledon. He won 8 of them. And Djokovic was better than Federer 3 times there. And, you know, we never saw Nadal or Federer winning the Australian Open, beating Djokovic. Would it be once? We didn't see that. So I think that this ability to hunt them where they are the best, at moments where they were the best, I think it's, in the narrative, it's incredible. And the other thing, of course, is that he won 4 slams in a row already. He didn't make the calendar slam, but he won 4 slams in a row, which is one of the most difficult things to do in tennis. And if he wins the US Open, it will be only the second in the Open era. Making the same performance as Rod Laver, who did it twice and once in the Open era in 69. And I mean, there are only 2 of them at this level, Laver and Djokovic. And nobody had won 4 slams in a row since Rod Laver already, when Djokovic did that in 2016 at Roland Garros. I'm not sure Djokovic needs to win the US Open this year. I think he always achieved something that's a little stronger than the incredible track records by Federer and Nadal. We have to recall that their track record is incredible as well.
I know Djokovic has 9 Australian Opens, Federer 8 Wimbledon titles. Rafa has 13 titles at Roland Garros and counting. Does that help or hurt his GOAT argument? Is there less balance in his success than the other 2, or should he be lauded for such dominance?
Well, Djokovic's track record is a little more balanced than the other 2 because he won every slam twice. Federer won Roland Garros only once. Nadal won the US Open only once. You know what you lead me to say? Only. He won this slam only once.
You've already found the negative.
Yeah. Whereas it is, of course, the peak of any tennis player, of course. From my point of view, it's not that important. I think it could have been a criteria very loud if, for instance, Federer or Nadal wouldn't have won all the slams. I don't know if Rafa had 16 Roland Garros and 4 Wimbledon, it would be tremendous. But okay, you could say that he never won any slam on hard courts, and God only knows that it's hard for Nadal to play on hard courts. So no, it's unbalanced for sure, but I mean it's not that massively unbalanced. I think that it's totally legitimate that all of them have their preferred tournaments, the one that highlights better their skills and even their personality, probably.
Well, Roger was the first of the 3 to establish himself. Incredibly, he had 16 Grand Slam victories in 2010 when Djokovic had only 1 to his name. Does that give Federer an edge, the fact that fans and pundits were on his side before Djokovic or Nadal?
What's fascinating in the story is that it's like in the movies. I mean, it's a very progressive story. When Federer started his journey, when he won Wimbledon in 2003, I mean, he just was a youngster in tennis, like any others. You had Juan Carlos Ferrero and Andy Roddick, for instance, at this moment. He was not supposed to be better than those guys. And he just started his journey. He had beaten Sampras 2 years before, and no one could have imagined at that moment that this guy would have won 15 or 20 slams. He just lived his own story at the very beginning. The fact that he lived his own story led him to be very dominant for 4 years. Very dominant, but I mean, Sampras had been dominant in the same way. Landl had been dominant in the same way. We were there with, probably a future legend, but the standards were not incredible at that point. And what made the story tremendous is when Nadal came here and was able to compete with Federer with a game that was the opposite, of course. And progressively, little by little, he also competed with him on fast courts. So it became a rivalry between two for this GOAT debate. And then a third guy came in. He broke a rivalry that was really incredible for tennis. That was one of the greatest rivalry in the sports era. I mean, if you remember the Wimbledon final in 2008, you could feel that everyone on earth had seen this game. It was tennis was very lucky to have this rivalry with two characters and two players like them. It was barely impossible to imagine that the third guy with other characteristics would go there and broke the rivalry and be stronger than the two others at this point. And it was the case, and that's what makes the story unbelievable. It's difficult to rewrite history, but you can presume that probably Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic wouldn't have reached this level of game and this level and this track record with 20 slams without the others. And it's their part of modesty in this debate. I mean, they are champions. They want to win everything. They are as selfish as a champion can be. But I know that their strongest motivation came from the fact that they had also champions able to resist them at their peak. And that's what makes this story really fascinating.
Well, maybe one day when they're retired, we can get all three of them in a room and they can be honest, brutally honest about who is the greatest player. We shall see. I hope you're all enjoying this latest episode of the Volley podcast. Make sure you let us know who you think the GOAT is. And for more tennis content, head over to tennismajors.com after you've joined us here. Cedric, so all this talk of the big three, but who is Novak Djokovic's biggest rival today?
Very good question. Because a part of the story right now is that we can't really know if Nadal and Federer are able to compete with Djokovic in his quest for the absolute number of victories in Slam. Let's recall that Djokovic is 34, but as Mats Wilander is saying it in the media today, he looks like he's 28, but he's 34, and at some point you can't forget it. Nadal is 35, and he looks like a 35 player because his game is more physical since the very beginning. For the very first time, we saw him lose a match, notably on the physical part, in Roland Garros against Djokovic after 4 hours of an incredible clay battle. But those battles he would win there till last year. So Nadal is 35. In Roland Garros, he said a sentence that I think that wasn't mentioned enough. He said that I wouldn't be there and win 15, 16 Roland Garros, etc., etc. But if you listen carefully to what he's saying, it means that he just has one chance remaining, because if he thinks he can't win 15 Roland Garros, it means that he can probably win a 14th, and it can probably be next year. Next year he will be 36. Winning Roland Garros at 37 looks on the paper, even if you're Nadal, pretty complicated, and you have to remember that Federer won his last slam to date, his latest slam, age 36. So it's the age Nadal will have next year. And Federer, of course, he will be 40 in August. He lost pretty heavily in quarterfinals in Wimbledon. We just don't know if he reached his peak after his 2 surgeries last year, or if he can play at this best level again, or let's say the level he had 2 years ago in Wimbledon final, for instance. We don't know. He doesn't know. Nobody knows. For sure, it's still his objective, and I think that if he thinks that he can be back at this level one day, even for one tournament, he will continue. If he doesn't think that,
it's not either of the other two. It's not Federer or Nadal.
It seems difficult at this point. That's why I wrote a story, a column called "The Big Shit Became the Big One." I mean, the big one is Djokovic. And if you look at what happened this year in tennis, it's pretty easy to see that you had Djokovic in final versus a representative of what we call the next gen. Of course, the players of the next gen are 25 right now. So 25, you are a big boy, you are a strong adult. But it's still the next gen because it was the first, next gen ATP Masters. I think it was in 2018, and it's the players born after 1996. So you had Medvedev in Melbourne, you have Tsitsipas in Roland Garros, you had Berrettini in Wimbledon. Who knows if it can be, Rublev, Zverev, who already was in final last year, by the way, or another guy in final in the US Open. But the reality is that the players that are the closest to disturb Djokovic in this kind of tournament are players from this generation. Once again, Tsitsipas led 2-0 in the final against Djokovic in Roland Garros. Medvedev was very far from that in Melbourne, but he had beaten Djokovic in the Masters maybe 2 months before. And I think those guys are very close to disturb Djokovic in this kind of tournament, and that's also what the race ranking is telling us. If you look at the race ranking, it's not Nadal the second, Federer the third. The big point for Djokovic right now is to continue to have this authority, both technically and mentally, on the players of this generation. And I think that one of the most important moments of this season in tennis was in Melbourne, when Djokovic, I think it was after the semi-final and before the final, said on Eurosport, well, I don't want to lack respect to those guys, but till this moment, the next gen is still Nadal, Federer, and I. They still haven't proved anything at this level, and it's still true. And I mean, you could think that we because I'm a journalist, I think that this kind of quote is very important. It's in the locker room, this kind of sentence and this kind of statement exists as well.
Okay, well, how about a yes or no answer? Does Djokovic have a rival right now?
No.
And that's probably worrying for Nadal and Federer. I think it's also very important to look at their impact on the next generation of players, particularly when it comes to style and technique. And I'm talking about younger players now that are just getting into tennis. For example, Nadal's courtside mannerisms and powerful forehand, Federer's majesty on court and that elegant backhand, Djokovic's return game, mental fortitude. Which of the big three, and I'm going to get you to pick one, has had the strongest influence on changing the way that young tennis players play and approach the game?
Oh, that would need, I think, not even a full episode, but a series of episodes. what you're asking me? Probably Djokovic is the most complete player we ever seen. He's probably the best, the first player that could let a young player today think that it's possible to have a very complete game without any weakness. I'm sure that if I'm asking you or anyone else what are the best Djokovic quality, nobody will quote his serve, But he's a very big server. I mean, I think during this Wimbledon, he was the second guy on the list with the best rate of points won behind his first serve. I mean, he's not John Isner, he's not Opelka, but there is so much variety, so much accuracy in every shot that he is an incredibly good server. And even on his way he has a net play that is very, very, very good. You can forget that because he's not a server volleyer, or he doesn't have, I don't know, the the same kind of motion as a Pat Rafter, but he's an incredible net player. So I think Djokovic is the very first guy that could lead any young player to think that it's possible to have a very global game, efficient with no weak point, basically. Djokovic, the absolute best level of Djokovic, I think, and I mean, other people say that before me. Patrick said that, Andre Agassi said that. It's probably the better game ever played. When Sampras stopped tennis with his 14 Grand Slams, it was very difficult to say what would be the profile of the next dominant players. And the reality is that we have three of them, three monuments with three different styles. I think we should consider that we don't know exactly what will be the game of the next big players when Djokovic will be 40, but you can see that, for instance, a guy like Medvedev, who's number 2 in the world, that could have been number 1 if he had won Wimbledon, so it's very close. I mean, Medvedev's technique and style of play is unprecedented. I mean, I couldn't say that Medvedev is influenced by one of the three. So I think we have to be very modest on that and let players be themselves and have their own journey in the future.
Well, I've seen Cedric play tennis, and he definitely models his game on Roger Federer. I'm just going to say that now. I'm just going to point that out. Let's settle this with 2 final questions. So first, if you could give me one thing that each of Federer, Nadal and Djokovic could do before they retire that would elevate their status even more, what would that be for each of them?
I think for Novak, it's pretty easy. It's to win the more slams possible. Well, we don't know if he's going to play the Olympic Games, but it's safe to say that it's the only very important titles he didn't have. Nadal had a gold medal in singles and Federer in doubles. Djokovic didn't have any gold medal in the previous Olympics, and it's difficult for me to choose between an Olympic medal and the most slams possible. But I would say, yes, let's have a third way. Djokovic, I'm sure that one day he would love to win a Grand Slam final against any opponent, having a public fully committed behind him. It's not the case. We can feel that he missed that, and I think if at some point, if his achievement lead him to be backed by a whole stadium at some point for maybe what would be his last slam. He would love that. So let's say that. For Nadal, I think that winning at least one last Roland Garros, beating Djokovic again in final there would be.
But that motivates him, right?
Important for him to feel at home, to feel à la casa last time in Paris. And for Federer, you have 2 options. The first option is to say that he would play his best tennis at Wimbledon the last time and winning it. I mean, for any Federer fan, if you can replay the 219 final with another issue, it would be a dream come true. So let's say a last final in Wimbledon where he could achieve that. We are not sure that it can be possible. So the very important thing for Federer will be and for his fans, I think, will be not to have so many tournaments like he played in Paris and London, because in Paris he won 3 matches, but he retired not being sure that he would be fit enough to compete the next game and the next tournaments. And in Wimbledon, he was not that bad, but he was not the best Federer, and he had a massive loss against Hurkacz. I mean, 6-love in the third. The only other 6-love he had in the century was versus Nadal in Roland Garros final. So, I mean, everybody will be happy to see him try again. But if in the US Open, in the Olympics, and in the Australian Open, this kind of story repeats again, probably that his end of career won't be the one he deserved, and I think he have to, and I trust him for that, I should say, to really find the finest way to end his career, being the legend he is, and he will be for ages.
Yes, every Federer fan, I'm sure, still thinks about those championship points at the 2019 Wimbledon final. Final one then, Cedric, if you could give the big three, or as you like to call it, the big one plus Federer and Nadal, truth serum, which do you think cares most about being widely viewed as the greatest player?
The most competitive of all three, I think, is Novak Djokovic. He's pretty, he's pretty genuine on that. For 2 or 3 years now, he says that he wants to break that record, and he doesn't fear to say that more openly than the others. And it led to, a little statement by Nadal. I think it was in March when he said that, precisely, that Djokovic was obsessed by that, and Djokovic didn't like this answer, and he let us know. But I think that, Djokovic being the third in this story, and not being so beloved as Federer and Nadal are, he's the guy who invested the most in the performance issue, I think. Nadal often says that it's more important for him to be a good person than a good player. I'm sure Federer and Djokovic think the same thing for them, but Nadal preferred to go on this boat and fish rather than playing Wimbledon and the Olympics. So that means that the fact that he has to enjoy a balanced life and to play the longest possible is probably what's most important for him. I mean, he's just proven it. And for Federer, I think he's very proud of having been the guy who opened this road. I think Federer probably is the man that could suffer the most among the three when we will be able to rewrite this story. I mean, Federer, after all, is the guy who lost the most important finals. You've just spoken about the Wimbledon finals in 2019, where he had 2 match points, but he had a lot of loss of this kind against the two. He lost in Australia in 2009. He cried during the ceremony, if you remember well. And it's a final he should have won. He was at home. Nadal wasn't a hardcore player at that time. He lost. He lost in Wimbledon against Nadal in 2008, what is supposed to be the greatest match in tennis history and the peak of his rivalry with Nadal. He lost. I mean, he's the guy who might, at the very end, have the most regrets. But at least seeing them at 39, continuing to inspiring the two others in playing very late, at least he won't have any regrets in the fact that he will have tried till the end.
Well, there you go, Cedric. I don't know what we solve when it comes to the big three. Maybe that it's now called the big one. All I know is you are the Tennis Majors GOAT, my friend. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, man.
So a big thank you to Cedric Rouquet for joining us on The Volley, creator of The Big One. I love that. Make sure you check out everything we are doing over at tennismajors.com. So much great written and video content over there. And stick with us here on the podcast, which you can listen to on the website, Spotify, and all main media platforms. Take care, everybody, and hey, be your own GOAT. Bye for now.